So.
Can I ask one thing? I'm a little uncomfortable.
I know.
I'm to the right of Mr. Fun.
Well, I want you to know, I never viewed the political spectrum as right to left. I view it as up or down.
Can I go to the up and you'll be down?
All right, gentlemen.
Well, let's talk about costs for a second. I appreciated Peter, the architect of the study by Mitch Pearlstein's group, suggested that there's not much cost. The Citizens for Election Integrity, partially run by Professor David Schultz, that many of us know, estimated the cost between $50 and $150 million. We know there's going to be some costs, and to suggest there'll be none is ludicrous. The provisional ballot process requires a good deal of additional expense. Photo IDs, well, the amendment purports to grant free governmental IDs. All right, but somebody has to take time out of work, and somebody has to go to a place in which folks who are fearful of voting will feel comfortable with in order to get that. And let me just give you an example. How about if you're in your 90s and living in a nursing home? Okay, you're going to pick up and they're going to wheel you out to the voter registration place? Or the voter registration people are going to come to ID you? These are people who may have been in that nursing home for 10 or 15 years. Or let's talk about students. If we do away with this and we don't have vouching, how about a student who was registered at home, is now in college, and let's say, God forbid, they're living with their girlfriend. That's the place they live. They've been there for 6 months. They are entitled to vote, and the only person who can vouch for them is their girlfriend. Okay? But they live there. They're entitled to vote. And yet, when the Secretary of State, properly so, sends out the postcard to verify, postal worker sees this and says, oh, Sam Jones doesn't live here, Emily Smith does, and sends it back. Well, that's one of those statistics that we hear quoted. The problem being is there are lots of better ways that are less intrusive of responding to this, like electronic poll books and having pictures. We can do those sort of things. The problem is, having fought to balance my budget every year to do the prosecution I'm assigned to do, I know local government doesn't have $50 to $150 million to do this for an issue that simply has not been a problem in Minnesota.
Well, the 90-year-old resident of a nursing home, in most cases, votes absentee already. And also, in most states, you have people who often arrange to visit the nursing homes and assist them with their ballot. Now, that can present problems. A former congressman from Pennsylvania was convicted of voter fraud because he had gone into an Alzheimer's home's patient and, shall we say, assisted people far too much with their ballots. But there are, look, this debate is early days, but let me just give you a snapshot from the debate on voter ID in Pennsylvania. We just had a court case in Pennsylvania. The ACLU and various other groups went in and challenged. They had various witnesses. They had, I think, 12 or 13 witnesses. The judge ruled, I've looked at all 12 or 13 cases, none of these people will be disenfranchised by this voter ID law. The top witness of the ACLU was a 93-year-old woman who had her purse stolen. She didn't have an ID. It was a very sad story. The day after the judge's ruling upholding voter ID, she went down to the bus stop, took the bus down to the DMV, got her ID. They didn't know she was coming. They didn't give her any special treatment. The Philadelphia required a picture of her, holding up her nice ID. Poor lawyers were less than pleased. Everyone else on the list, the judge found, could plausibly vote, either by absentee or by a provisional ballot. And provisional ballots are used in over 40 states. This is not rocket science. Provisional ballots are not expensive. You set them aside. In Pennsylvania, for example, you can send in your proof of ID in a provisional ballot by fax, by email, image, by regular postal mail, by showing up in person. And in Pennsylvania, and I would not be opposed to this, let's say you're indigent and you can't obtain the background material to get an ID. In Pennsylvania, all you have to do is fill out an affidavit that says, I'm too poor to get the background documentation for my ID, but I specify that I am who I say I am. Your vote will be counted. The enabling legislation can take care of all of that. It probably will. Now, if you want to specify every jot and tittle of the enabling legislation, that's not what a constitutional amendment is for. I support the widest possible outreach. I stand with all of the people who say we are doing people a favor by getting them an ID. Because if you don't have an ID, you can't fully function in the mainstream American life. Let's get everyone an ID.
Let's talk about fraud, what it's supposed to be. The 2008 election was one of the closest in Minnesota's history, and it was scrutinized from top to bottom. I know because a lot of that scrutiny occurred from lawyers in my office and in the Hennepin County Government Center. At the end of it, two lawyers, Fritz Knock and Joe Friedberg, said to the Minnesota Supreme Court there was no fraud in this election. No fraud. Those people who had their sleeves up working every day were desperately trying to find fraud.
Was that before the Minnesota Majority's report on felons, yes or no? Yes or no?
Am I in a court of law where I have to answer questions, yes or no, Your Honor?
Well, I'd like that.
May I complete my question?
It was before the Minnesota Majority report demonstrating there were 1,100 felons who voted illegally. That statement was made before that report was issued.
Okay, and let's take a look at that report. Okay, they came to us in Hennepin County and said there were 800 or 900 illegal felons that voted. And when we looked at them, 400 or 500 of them were thrown out immediately because they weren't felons, or because their period of time on probation was over. So that took care of a whole bunch of them. They gave us 454. At the end of the day, we charged 31.
38.
No, I'm sorry.
You said 38.
No.
Once before. Were you wrong?
We charged 34, and there were 38.
Some of them, get your numbers straight.
Get your state straight, sir. This is not Pennsylvania. This is not New Mexico. This is not Louisiana.
It was not 31.
Even Mississippi.
It was not 31.
But it is Minnesota in 2012, where we have a biennial budget of what, 62 billion, Jen? Senator Olson, what do we spend every 2 years in Minnesota? 62? General fund? All funds? All funds. Oh, I don't store that memory. All right, general fund, 43.
We put 90 in the report.
Well,
Look,
let's
I don't want to get bogged. I don't want to get bogged down.
We spend about $30-some billion. General fund. Let me ask you
That's
this.
really not.
But no,
Let's talk about what's
but I just want to calm things down a little bit. If we spend, say, $43 billion, that's about the right number, in a biennial operating cost, and we do end up spending $100 million plus, although our study argues a much smaller number, isn't that a small price to pay for one of the principles that I'd like to have govern this discussion, which is integrity? Voters should be confident that their election systems deter and detect fraud. And I remember the 2008 and other close, when Fritz Knock and the gang were doing their hard work rolling up their sleeves. But one of the principles is integrity and the confidence that average citizens have.
Fair enough. Let me talk about that then.
Yeah,
We talk about felon voters. We talk about felon voters then.
Believe it.
Okay? Felon voters, there were felon voters. So what did we do? We didn't have to pass a constitutional amendment. We did something fairly simple. We sent a letter to everyone in Hennepin County who was on probation, saying you can't vote. And to be fair to the people who had come on probation, we sent you can now vote. So what happened then? Well, instead of 38 cases we charged, there were 11. Because a lot of people who may have voted in other years as a felon voter didn't vote that time. So the question really is clarity on issues. Felon voters, if that is our problem, it's the only problem that's been articulated to me in any numbers. We've already taken steps to reduce that profoundly. And therefore, we don't need to spend $50 or $100 million, but we don't need to discriminate against our senior citizens who want to vote. We don't have to discriminate and disenfranchise our military personnel overseas because they can't meet the substantially equivalent of a government ID. I don't think we want that. I don't think we want to disenfranchise a whole slew of people, so it's easier for me to get to the one person who double voted. And you know what? We caught that person, and we prosecuted.
The military personnel have government ID provisions of this.
part of the problem in most states exempt military personnel overseas. Not this constitutional amendment. That exact amendment came up in the Minnesota legislature and was roundly defeated by the Republican majorities in the House and the Senate.
Military IDs are routinely accepted in almost all states for this purpose. Look,
Rejected
let
Minnesota.
me just specify that the number of people we have to worry about is far greater than the felons that were mentioned. 6,224 people in an election decided by 300 odd votes show up, same-day registration. They provide unverifiable names and or addresses, resulting in a challenge because the postal card comes back. Aren't you curious about those 6,224 voters in an election that was decided by 300 odd votes, 312 votes? I am curious. I think some of those may well have been fraudulent. Now, it's nice that you sent a letter, which I don't think your predecessor did, to those felons. I don't think that was done in the 2006, 2004, 2002 elections. I'd like to commend you for doing that, something that had not been done in the past. But you were able to send a letter to the felons because you had an address. What address would you send to track down those 6,224 people who voted? Because once they vote, you can't take their vote back. Are you curious about those 6,224 people who same-day registered and we can't locate them?
Well, I just gave you an example.
Are you curious?
Of course. Good. And you know, we did something about it, sir.
What did you do?
Okay. Well, we inquired, we tried to trace and check on these people, and we tried to find out if they registered to vote the next time. And we also did some inquiry for where we learned of cases, just like the one I tried to tell you about the boyfriend and the girlfriend, and he lived there. And he lived there, and he lived there for longer than 6 months, when Minnesota only requires 30 days. But he wasn't on the mailbox. And so when the postal card came, they sent it back.
I understand. So of the 6,224, 2,600 odd were in Hennepin. What did you learn about those people?
But, you know, we learned a whole lot about folks and how to do the registration. We learned a lot about the
How many of those
felons.
people did you find?
No, I don't have that exact number.
Very
right now.
few. Very few.
If that makes you feel better, you can say,
No, it's
What
true.
do you ask about the boyfriend?
She vouched for him, but he is one of the numbers my friend is throwing back at me because when the Secretary of State mailed out his registration card after the election, it got returned to the post office and he was taken off the rolls.
But couldn't he go down on election day with a photo ID with his address on it? and
Because his address wasn't his girlfriend's place. Now, he could have done it.
Doesn't he need to get it together?
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting. You have children? You had kids go through college?
High school.
I got 5 great kids. And my guess is that they don't always re-register the driver's license within 30 days as the law requires. In fact, yours truly didn't do that when he moved. He did it 90 days later. Okay? The point, let's go back. Let's get out of the little facts and get up to the big picture.
Let's get out of the facts.
The issue we had here.
Facts are stubborn things.
Thank you. Your comments were much appreciated in this discussion. If you look at this, in Minnesota, what we have had is no cases of fraud. Do you think Joe Friedberg and Fritz Knott would have found them if they were there? It took us 6 months. They didn't find them because there wasn't fraud there. Did we have a felon voter? Yes, we did. Did we take steps to reduce that? Yes, we did. And we did it without disenfranchising all sorts of people. You cannot tell me that all the military personnel that voted in 2010 will be able to vote the same way in 2014 because this will restrict their capacity to vote. No question.
You know, I spoke with Senator Coleman before I came here, and he reminded me that we have learned a great deal about the 2008 election since those early weeks before the Minnesota Supreme Court hearing where his lawyers made certain statements, and he assured me those statements would not have been made if he had known what we now know, especially about felon voting and especially about 6,224 election day registrants whose addresses have